Number 10. The Richardson family murders. When Jasmine Richardson was only 12 years old, she plotted the brutal murder of her entire family. And as much as I hate to say it, she is currently walking among us, a free woman. The massacre took place in April of 2006. Jasmine viciously killed both her parents and her younger brother, who was only 8 years old. And here's why. It was all for a boy. Jasmine's parents, Mac and Deborah Richardson, had explicitly told their daughter that she was not to date 23-year-old Jeremy Steinke. And yeah, I'm sure all parents can sympathize with this. Nobody wants their 12-year-old daughter dating a fully grown man. But when you're 12, you just don't think clearly or rationally. It's a fact. Jasmine decided the only answer to her problem was to kill her parents and her brother. But before the murders, Jasmine had been an ordinary teenager. She was described by people who knew her as happy and social. But then, Jasmine met Jeremy, who told her that he was a werewolf over 300 years old. Clearly, he did not belong in society. He transformed the child by manipulating her into wearing dark clothing, calling herself a witch, and all kinds of other crazy nonsense. He also goaded her into killing her own parents, act that they did together, slashing Mac and Deborah's throats and leaving their bodies in the basement. In 2007, Jasmine was found guilty on 3 counts of murder in the first degree. She was only 13, sentenced to spend the next 10 years in prison. On the other hand, Jeremy was given 25 to life without parole. Jasmine was released in 2016 and is apparently living right now in a secret location under a secret identity. Number 9. Running over your dad. A man was being taught how to drive by his father. The 34-year-old Colombian national had never learned how to drive throughout his entire adult life. So, his 65-year-old dad decided it was about time that he learned. The pair went to a church parking lot near Orange Blossom Drive in Naples for practice. But the driving lesson went terribly wrong. The son ended up ramming his father with the car when he hit the accelerator by accident. He had been trying to hit the brake, but he didn't know which pedal was which. He accidentally floored it and ran over his own dad. According to Florida Highway Patrol, the dad had been standing outside of the car and instructing his son on how to park properly in a parking space. This is why he wasn't physically in the car. Plus, the dad had been standing behind a parking block, thinking he would be safe, even in the case of an accident. But when his son hammered the accelerator, the vehicle simply jumped over the parking block and hit his father. The dad was taken to Lee Memorial Hospital, where he ended up dying due to his injuries. And because his son didn't actually have a driver's license, he's now facing felony charges, possibly vehicular manslaughter. All the poor guy wanted to do was impress his dad by learning how to drive, but instead, he ran him over and killed him. Number 8. Sleepover burning. A boy suffered third-degree burns following the worst sleepover party ever. The kid was only 12 years old at the time of the incident. He received terrible burns to his face, chest, and back after he was attacked during the sleepover at his friend's house. According to his mother, the skin was literally hanging off his body. Here's how the burning happened. When Antonio Kemp went to take a shower, his friend surprised him with a cup of liquid to his face. He pulled back the shower curtain and threw a cup of mysterious liquid all over Antonio, immediately causing his skin to bubble and peel off his bones. But what's really crazy is that we don't know what the liquid in the cup was, if the kid had somehow gotten a hold of a chemical agent or some kind of acid. After the incident, the attacker's parents invoked the child's rights to an attorney and have kept him silent. The police are trying to investigate, but the family is blocking their investigation to the best of their ability. Poor Antonio is now totally traumatized. He has no idea why his friend threw a cup of mystery acid in his face. He's afraid to talk to anyone. He doesn't want to shower anymore. And he frequently wakes up in the middle of the night crying. He's also terrified by his new appearance. The burns to his face are so bad that doctors had to use pigskin to cover up his wounds, while Antonio's body works to regrow his own skin. Number 7. Video game killer. In Ohio, one gamer took his favorite video game to an obscene level of obsession. It was 2007, and the game to play was Halo 3. Back then, parents didn't know what to do about kids who played too many video games. Games were seen by many as a national emergency. The parents of Daniel Petrick believed their kid was one of these troubled children who desperately needed to be separated from the video game world. So, they took away Halo 3. It proved to be a bad decision because Daniel stood up and shot his mother and father. His mother died right there on the floor, but his father lived. Daniel went to court for the murder of his mom. During the proceedings, it came out that he was a little delusional. He had played so many video games that he'd come to believe that death was not real. Just like in video games, a person could die and then come back. He was completely off his rocker, and he was already 17 at the time of the murder. He should have been old enough to know the difference. The judge saw it the same way, and so he sentenced Daniel to 23 years in prison. Number 6. Dollar store rampage. We have all seen somebody's misbehaved child throw a tantrum in a public store, but one kid in Florida has taken it to a whole new level of terrifying. According to the Daily Mail, the kid was only 10 years old when he went absolutely berserk in a Dollar General store. The kid left such a trail of destruction that shoppers were forced to flee. The child was ripping apart the displays, trashing the store, and even threatening to punch the other customers. And he was only 10. His rampage went on and on until somebody, believed to be a store employee, finally had enough. The employee grabbed the kid by the collar of their shirt and dragged him outside. By the time the kid was calmed down, the police had already arrived. But unfortunately, neither the store nor the police would comment on what happened to the boy after he was taken away. We don't know if the police threw him in jail, if they threw his parents in jail, or even where his parents were during the episode. The kid just ran into the store by himself and tried to tear it down. Who do you think is to blame for this crazy dollar store rampage? The kid or the parents? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 5. ALYSSA Bustamante. ALYSSA Bustamante was the rebellious teenager who slaughtered her neighbor. ALYSSA was only 15 years old when she made the horrible decision that would change multiple lives. On the outside, she looked like a totally ordinary teenager, but online, she showed herself as a dark, mysterious, and pretty evil monster. And as it turned out, that evil alter ego from the internet wasn't just an alter ego. It was ALYSSA's real self. She had fantasies about doing terrible things to people, and on October 21st, 2009, she finally gave in to her sick urges. 4 houses down the street from where ALYSSA lived, there was a girl named Elizabeth Olton. She was only 9, but she sometimes went over to ALYSSA's house to play with ALYSSA and her siblings. On October 21st, Elizabeth had begged her mother to go play at ALYSSA's house. But when it was 6 o'clock at night and Elizabeth wasn't home yet, her mom knew something had gone terribly wrong. It was the day after Elizabeth's disappearance that the FBI identified ALYSSA as the killer. They found a small hole behind the house in the shape of a grave. In her defense, ALYSSA told the FBI that she was simply a fan of digging random holes in her yard. But obviously, the FBI dug the hole up themselves, at which point they found Elizabeth's dead body. They also found a full confession in Elizabeth's journal, in which she detailed how she strangled young Elizabeth, stabbed a knife through her chest, then buried her in the yard. The case was open and shut. ALYSSA, despite being just 15, was tried as an adult and narrowly escaped the death penalty. Her parole will come up in 30 years, at which point she may get out of jail. Number 4. Eric Smith. Eric Smith was born in January of 1980. Just 13 years later, he became a murderer. According to court documents from the 90s, Eric Smith was seen as a loner. He was frequently bullied. He wore thick glasses and got beat up because of it, and he had red hair and freckles. But after being bullied for so long, something snapped in Eric's mind. On August 2, 1993, Eric lured a 4-year-old boy named Derek Robbie into a remote part of the local park. There, Eric performed acts so sick and disturbing that I can't even talk about them here. At just 13 years old, he proved to be one of the most sadistic killers in American history. In that remote section of the park, Eric Smith strangled the child to death, dropped large rocks on his head, and much more. 2 days after the funeral, Eric Smith admitted what he had done. In 1994, he was convicted of second-degree murder and given the maximum sentence possible, a minimum of 90 years. Ever since then, he's been denied parole multiple times. In total, the parole board has denied Eric his freedom 10 times, with the most recent being in 2020. Remember to always stop bullying in its tracks. If you see someone that needs help, stand up for them. You never know, you might save their life. Number 3. The Slender Man Killer. Anissa Weier was only 12 years old when she dedicated herself to the fictional character known as Slenderman. It was in 2014 that Anissa worked together with Morgan Geyser to lure one of their 12-year-old friends, Peyton Lautner, into the forest in Wisconsin. Once they had the child deep in the woods, Morgan stabbed her with a knife 19 times while Anissa stood there and watched. It was all to impress the Slenderman, who both girls at the time believed was real. Amazingly, the victim didn't even die. After stabbing her so many times, the attempted killers helped rush her to the hospital, where she miraculously survived. In this case, not actually doing the stabbing saved Anissa from a full life locked inside a mental hospital. Also, Morgan's poor stabbing saved them both from jail time. According to Dr. John Kellman, who operated on the victim the day of the stabbing. If the knife had gone only a hair deeper, the girl would have died. In 2017, ALYSSA was sentenced to spend 25 years locked in a mental institution. But get this, she was just released partway through 2021. She has to stay home and wear a GPS ankle bracelet, but she's been freed despite her role in trying to murder one of her friends. Both ALYSSA and Morgan had to face the judge in adult court, both charged with first-degree attempted intentional homicide. ALYSSA got 25 years, while Morgan got 40, and Morgan hasn't been let out. Number 2. 14-year-old kidnapper. A young boy was recently arrested after a string of armed robberies and kidnappings in the D.C. area. The kid was just 14 years old when he started his crime spree with at least 4 accomplices. Beginning on August 24th, the kid and his friends started abducting people at gunpoint. They singled out victims who were by themselves, usually walking in the early morning or late at night. The child kidnappers, as they were literally just kids, blindfolded their victims and tied their hands with zip ties. They then forced them inside of a vehicle, drove them around the city, and sometimes roughed them up a bit. They stole the credit cards, cash, and whatever else the victim had on them at the time. They even tortured the victims to get their bank account information, allowing them to easily withdraw money from various ATMs. Imagine being rolled over by a couple of 14-year-old kids with guns. Not only would that be humiliating, it would give you a pretty grim outlook on the fate of humanity. Thankfully, the cops managed to identify and capture the one boy, though they're still looking for the others, who have somehow continued to elude the police. And number 1, caught carjacking. A group of kids have been busted trying to carjack people in their own neighborhood. One of them was 11, the other was 12, and the final 2 were both 14. The 4 suspects went on a crime spree in the San Leandro area of California. 2 of the suspects tried to carjack a guy in the middle of the street, only to have the guy open his car door, get out, and body slam one of the children onto the concrete. He then stepped on the kid, pinning him to the ground. The preteen wasn't so tough at that point, squealing like a pig as he tried to wiggle away. The guy then let him go, and he and his accomplice took off in their getaway vehicle. Shortly after, the police arrested both those kids and 2 more in a separate attempted carjacking. For whatever reason, it seems people just aren't that scared of 11-year-olds with guns, and they yet again failed to steal anyone's vehicle. The children were released to their guardians, but according to the San Leandro police, they went right back out and tried carjacking again. You would think after 3 failed attempts, these kids would just give up and go back to playing video games.
9. Wacy Garon Miklis. 38-year-old Wacy Garon Miklis already had an extensive rap sheet when he stole a pickup truck earlier this year and sped through the streets of Oklahoma City, hitting speeds of up to 95 miles per hour and blasting through red lights. His lengthy list of past crimes include bank robberies, grand larceny, and robbery with a dangerous weapon. But Miklis took his reckless behavior to a new low when he drove fast enough to lose control of the stolen truck and smashed into a car being driven by 28-year-old Star Shells. Sadly, the innocent young mother died in the crash. She was 5 months pregnant and left behind 2 sons. And several other people came close to dying that day when Miklis narrowly avoided hitting their vehicles. He had sped off when officers tried to pull him over, triggering an intense police chase that unfortunately ended in tragedy. Star's surviving family members hired a lawyer who told the Oklahoman that police made the situation even more dangerous by chasing Miklis into a crowded area with a lot of people in it, especially during the busy early morning hours. Miklis faces a slew of charges, including first-degree murder by eluding, felony attempting to elude, driving with a suspended license, reckless driving, and being under the influence of methamphetamine. 8. Kelsey Rose Hauser. Kelsey Rose Hauser was a passenger in a stolen car being driven by someone who gave police no choice but to open fire. When the 25-year-old found herself caught up in a high-speed chase in El Cajon, California in early 2016, it must have been terrifying, but she probably did not expect to die. Tragedy unfolded after police tried to pull over the red Toyota that Hauser was riding in with driver Jeffrey Sims, 2 other passengers, and a dog. After briefly stopping twice, Sims put the pedal to the metal and accelerated the car towards an officer who was getting out of his patrol car. The policeman quickly pulled out his gun and fired 4 or more bullets towards the vehicle, which smashed into 2 squad cars before coming to a stop. No officers were injured, but Hauser and the dog both died. Detectives told the press that they believed Sims and Hauser were fugitives with warrants out for their arrest. They charged Sims with attempted murder of a police officer and felony evading. The 2 surviving passengers were arrested on drug-related charges. A team from ABC News did its own digging and found that Hauser had a felony warrant out for her arrest for repeatedly failing to show to court in another county for drug possession charges. She and Sims were also wanted in Colorado on felony warrants. 7. Darren Ogham. In early 2019, police in Britain were pursuing a vehicle driven by 42-year-old Darren Ogham, a crack cocaine addict who didn't have a valid driver's license or car insurance. The chase only lasted 14 minutes, but the damage was far-reaching and permanent. While driving in his wife's car along the Aston Expressway with flashing lights in his rearview mirror, Ogham hit speeds of up to 100 miles per hour. At some point, he drove across the road and began driving in the wrong direction, directly into ongoing traffic. Ogham's vehicle finally came to an abrupt stop when he crashed into a Ford Fiesta being driven by Police Community Support Officer Holly Burke. He hit the car so hard, Burke died instantly upon impact. The suspect told police that he had panicked because he didn't want them to seize his wife's vehicle. He admitted that he smoked crack shortly before the chase. Ogham was sentenced to 9 years in prison and was banned from driving for 16 years. The prison sentence he received can only do so much to comfort Burke's friends and family, but at least he's behind bars, where he can't take any more innocent lives. 6. Death of an innocent bystander. One man was truly in the wrong place at the wrong time recently when he was struck suddenly by a Houston Police Department vehicle that the driver lost control of during a high-speed chase. It happened early in the evening when a woman contacted the police saying that a group of young men had held her at gunpoint and stolen her truck. The dealership she bought the truck through was able to track it, so she gave the location to law enforcement. When officers tried to pull the vehicle over, the driver sped off. The chase eventually ended with 5 youths jumping out of the truck and making a run for it. Police managed to capture 3 of them and charge them with aggravated assault. Right as things were starting to wind down, an HPD unit veered off the road and crashed into a sidewalk pedestrian, killing him in the process. Emergency personnel tried to save the man's life, but it was too late. The 2 police officers who were in the vehicle that crashed had been with the force for less than 2 years. They were placed on administrative leave while the situation is being investigated. This is just one example of tragedies resulting from police chases in recent years. A 2015 study found that high-speed police chases have killed at least 5,000 innocent bystanders and injured tens of thousands more since 1979. The actual number is likely even higher, according to researchers, because there's not really a solid established system for keeping track of these statistics. But people are aware that it's a problem and have increasingly called into question whether it's worth it for law enforcement to chase suspects for anything other than extremely serious crimes. And there's a growing movement to discourage police from relentlessly pursuing people for minor offenses. On the other hand, some members of law enforcement have pointed out that the majority of the time, when someone flees police over a minor offense, it's because they are guilty of something more serious and know that they might get caught. Plus, as Milwaukee Police Detective Michael Crivello pointed out in a 2015 USA Today interview, letting criminals think that they can get away with their behavior only encourages them to commit more crimes and take bigger risks, putting even more lives in danger. 5. A close call. Pritchard, Alabama resident Ashley Howard is lucky that she wasn't on her front porch the moment a suspect's vehicle crashed into it, causing major damage to her home. The impact was intense. Howard told local news station WPMI that she actually thought she was going to possibly die at first. Police from the Mobile and Pritchard departments were chasing a pickup truck when the driver lost control and rammed into her house, tearing down the structure rails. The driver was gone by the time Ashley got outside to see what happened. Now she's caught up in a miserable game of trying to see who will pay for the damages. Ashley doesn't have homeowners insurance, and both the Pritchard and Mobile police are denying any responsibility in the matter. In fact, they told her that the suspect will have to pay to fix the deck if and when he gets caught, and who knows when that'll happen. Even if he is caught, it doesn't mean that he'll ever repay the money, and pursuing it could prove to be extremely time-consuming and stressful. Have you ever had a close call like this? Tell us about it in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 4. Lewis Walker. While out on patrol in Evansville, Wyoming in the early hours of the morning, police noticed an SUV blow through a red light and jump a curb into a car wash parking lot. Officers followed the vehicle into a hotel parking lot where a passenger got out, but the driver ignored their commands and sped off with 2 other passengers inside. The chase lasted for hours. Thankfully, there was little traffic, so the pursuit didn't come at the cost of putting many other motorists or innocent bystanders' lives at risk. As the SUV approached the town of Glen Rock, officers prepared ahead of time by laying a spike strip in the road. The vehicle ran over it and popped at least 1 tire, but the driver was undeterred and got onto the interstate. Even after one of the front tires came off, the suspect continued driving at 90 miles per hour. As the vehicle rolled along on its front rim, spewing sparks onto the pavement, it pulled over, let one of the passengers out, and then went back to fleeing. The man who got out of the SUV told police that the 2 remaining suspects had weapons and wouldn't go down without a fight. Officers once again deployed spikes, and the driver continued to evade capture. But as they were about to learn, you can't run forever, especially with deflated tires. The vehicle hit some rocks over a drainage ditch and finally came to a stop. After chasing the SUV for 58 miles, police took the suspects into custody at gunpoint without incident. They found a loaded handgun that thankfully didn't get used. The driver, Lewis Walker, admitted that there were drugs in the vehicle and reportedly confessed to having used cocaine before the chase. He faces multiple charges, including eluding police officers, reckless endangerment, possession of a controlled substance. 3. Vanessa Armstead. At the beginning of 2021, 32-year-old Vanessa Armstead received medical treatment after getting into a car accident in Utica, New York. The next day, she allegedly walked into an ambulance storage facility and stole one of the vehicles. She led police on a 137-mile chase across the state. State troopers tried to stop the ambulance just 12 minutes after the unauthorized driver got behind the wheel, but Armstead refused to pull over. She got off the thruway in Rochester, smashed through the gate of a yacht club, and drove the vehicle straight into Irondequoit Bay. Vanessa swam to a private boat that was out on the water and was taken into custody. It took divers and a crew from the Monroe County Sheriff's Office over an hour to retrieve the ambulance. Police charged Armstead with felony charges of third-degree burglary and second-degree grand larceny. She was held on $3,500 bail. Vanessa admitted to stealing the ambulance but told investigators that she had no idea how she got to Monroe County. It's probably safe to say that this argument won't hold up well in court. 2. Joshua Swartwout. Police were baffled when a 23-year-old suspect named Joshua Swartwout managed to steal a Kansas Highway Patrol vehicle and drive it more than 30 miles while handcuffed behind his back, hitting speeds of 100 miles per hour along the way. Swartwout was being transferred to a detention facility following an arrest on suspicion of car theft when he saw the perfect opportunity to escape. The officer driving the vehicle pulled over to help with a serious motorcycle accident, and since Joshua was riding in the front passenger side with no partition or rear seat cage separating him from the driver's seat, while the officer was preoccupied helping the crash victims, Swartwout slid behind the wheel and took off. A high-speed chase ensued, but the car eventually started running out of gas, so Swartwout pulled over and continued the pursuit on foot. Police quickly caught up with him and apprehended him, but they didn't ask how he managed to drive with his hands already cuffed behind his back. Kansas Highway Patrol spokesperson Trooper Ted Hillerman told ABC News that he assumed Swartwout drove using his knees, which is admittedly impressive, especially considering how he traveled through narrow stretches of highway with a ditch on each side. 1. BRYAN, SORBY, and Adam KREINER. About a month ago, someone called the police in Lapeer, Michigan, and reported a reckless driver in a Chevy Malibu who was speeding and ignoring traffic lights. The vehicle reached speeds of 120 miles per hour during the ensuing chase. Toward the end of the half-hour-long pursuit, the driver, 20-year-old BRYAN SORBY, tore through a cornfield and then went briefly back onto the road. Then he crashed the car into a drainage ditch. A panicked SORBY got out of the car and ran into a pond. Thankfully, deputies eventually managed to talk the young man into cooperating with them. SORBY's passenger, 18-year-old Adam KREINER, had started to run away, but was more compliant than his friend and quickly caved to the officer's commands. Both men were taken to jail, where it was discovered that alcohol played a role in their behavior. KREINER soon learned that it paid off to be cooperative with the police. He faces fewer charges than SORBY, who will soon answer in court for allegedly fleeing, assaulting, and resisting a police officer and operating while intoxicated. His $10,000 bond was also set much higher than his more compliant friend, whose bond was set at $1,000. All things considered, both men are tremendously lucky that they weren't seriously injured driving at such high speeds and barreling through intersections during red lights. And as SORBY learned, the longer you drag a chase out, the more serious your charges are likely to become.
Number 10. The Jealous Husband and the Beauty Queen. A jealous husband choked his wife to death and then pretended to help a search party look for her in a bizarre attempt to rule himself out as the main suspect. This happened in Germany, with the murderer being a man known only as Patrick S., 27 years old. The prosecution in the case against him alleged that his marriage to Jennifer S. was strained because he had extreme jealousy issues and no self-control. Jennifer was the same age as him. She was a former beauty queen, and she had put up with his violent outbursts for quite a long time. But finally, Patrick had a violent outburst that Jennifer would never come back from. He murdered her with his bare hands on February 27th, then used her phone to text her sister, saying she was going for a walk along the local river. This was his grand plan. The fake text was supposed to convince everyone that she had gone for a walk along the river and then befallen some sort of tragedy. He even faked a search effort to try and cover his tracks. At the same time that they were searching for her by the river, Jennifer's body was discovered in some bushes across the city, just a few feet from their apartment. The husband was arrested the next day because the entire plan was nonsense. Number 9. Death by Bikini. A woman had been killed due to a wardrobe malfunction at a pool party. Her boyfriend, a Brazilian man named Nicolas Maichon, got insanely jealous when she accidentally flashed partygoers by pulling down her bikini. He was so jealous that he beat her to death. This guy was so jealous that an accident, a complete mistake, compelled him to commit murder. To be honest, it wasn't even that big of a deal. His girlfriend, Ana Paula Coutinho, was moving into the water when her bikini accidentally came loose. As it loosened, she instantly revealed herself to other people at the party. This happened to the outskirts of Sao Paulo, with the victim being only 24 years old. Immediately after the accident flash had occurred, the suspect became violent. He accused her of doing it deliberately to show off to all the partygoers. This was not true, but instead the ravings of a jealous maniac. After he beat her to death, he told his friends that she drowned in the pool and that he needed to take her to the hospital. But when he showed up to the hospital with her dead body, he ditched and ran. Doctors were able to easily determine Anna's cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head. And in the end, Nicholas was labeled a monster, hunted down by the police, and will hopefully pay the price for his disturbing and ridiculous crime. Number 8. Another jealous husband. Yet another jealous husband has gotten in trouble for beating up his wife. This time, the event took place at a bus stop in Washington Heights, with the husband beating his wife to death with a crowbar. She wasn't beaten to death immediately, but rather beaten senseless. It wasn't until 4 days later, as she lay mutilated in New York Presbyterian Hospital, Columbia, that she passed away. Her name was Maria Kelly, 49 years old. It was her husband, 63-year-old Julio Aponte, who bashed her brains in at the bus stop at West 163rd Street and Fort Washington Avenue. It wasn't even late at night or under the cover of darkness, but at 7 o'clock in the morning in the early light of day. Witnesses saw the whole thing unfold. Julio began screaming at Kelly at the bus stop, with one person hearing him say, "How dare you cheat on me?" Just seconds later, he had the crowbar of both hands, and Kelly was on the ground bleeding. It may be important to note that they weren't actually waiting for the bus. According to the assistant district attorney, Julio was waiting for his wife outside the building where they lived. He was waiting there to confront her with the crowbar, and after he finished his business, he got on his motorcycle and drove off. But apparently, he had nowhere to go. Julio turned himself in shortly after the attack and has since been charged with murder. Number 7. The wrong name. Mark Branford was 49 years old when he stabbed Kaylee Dunning in the middle of the night as she was naked in their bed. That was right before he took out a crowbar and bashed her brains in. I don't know what it is about jealous boyfriends and crowbars, but they seem to go hand in hand. The reason? Well, the reason for the killing is pretty bizarre. Mark had just proposed, unaware that Kaylee was still texting her ex-boyfriend. But he found out about it pretty quickly. Even though she had agreed to marry him, she was sending affectionate messages to a man named Dean Druney the same night. She had also been seeing Dean while seeing Mark, making this a love triangle gone horribly wrong. Sending the text messages to another man might have been okay, but it's what happened next that pushed Mark over the edge. She accidentally called Mark Dean that same night. Being called the wrong name is what ultimately pushed Mark into a blind and murderous rage. As Kaylee lay in bed, thinking everything was perfectly fine, Mark took out a knife and jammed it into her. Then he beat her with the crowbar until she was dead. Have you ever accidentally called your partner by the wrong name? If so, what were the consequences? And on that note, do you think Mark Branford went a little too far with the knife and the crowbar? Let us know in the comments, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 6. Not in front of the baby. In Germany, a jealous boyfriend was thrown into a fit of rage in which he hacked his lover to death while their baby watched the whole thing. Shaikh, 28 years old, was with his partner, Tatiana, for 5 long years. But after 5 years, he started growing paranoid, accusing her of sleeping with other men. And here's where things are going to get uncomfortable. Shaikh arrived in Germany from Afghanistan as a refugee in 2013, then met Tatiana when she was only 15 years old. At the time, he was 23. They got married in an Islamic ceremony, though this wasn't technically official under German law. The pair had a baby together 8 months before the murder. Tatiana brought the infant with her to visit Shaikh at the snack bar they owned together. It was then that he asked if she was cheating on him. According to what he told the court, she then said yes, she was seeing quite a few other people. We don't know if this is true, but it's what he claims. The revelation apparently caused him to lose control of himself. He locked the door of the business and slashed her with a knife. But she didn't die immediately. Tatiana was able to stagger out of the snack bar and get back to her car, trying to protect her baby. But the killer caught up with her anyway and stabbed her 18 more times with a Japanese chef's knife. While he was stabbing, he screamed at people walking by in the street that she was a cheater and that she deserved it. He also screamed, "She's only a woman." But in the end, the defense didn't get him very far. He's now on trial for murder and will probably be in prison for life. Number 5. The wrong glance. In San Bernardino, a gang member has been arrested after shooting at 2 men and killing one of them, all because he was jealous about the way they leered at his girlfriend while in a liquor store. The gang member was 18 years old at the time of the incident, which went down on February 25th. It was early, not even 11 o'clock in the morning. The gang member pulled up beside 2 men, had a few words, and then began blasting at them with a gun. 41-year-old Clarence Wimbish was killed, while the other man got away with no injuries at all. The shooter's been identified as Gilbert Ruiz, since booked on suspicion of murder. According to the police, the motive for the shooting is jealousy. Number 4. Murder for hire. A cybercriminal operating on the dark web was advertising himself as a hitman when a young woman from Washington tried to hire him for his services. He wasn't actually a hitman though, and the woman's request was so terrifying that he reported her to the FBI. It was the Bureau's National Threat Operations Center that received an anonymous tip from an operator of a dark web service that offered contract killings. A prospective customer had transferred $5,000 in Bitcoin for a hit to be carried out around the Seattle area. The message said something along the lines of, "Just kill her ASAP. I don't care how. So long as she's dead. I would prefer if you shoot her in the head." The intended victim worked for a corporation in Bellevue. She had a 3-year-old son, and she picked her son up from school every day at about 5 o'clock. The only other request was that proof be sent when the job was finished. If you're confused about the dark web operation, the tipster informed federal agents that the website was actually just a Bitcoin scam. They didn't actually commit any murders. This guy was just a con artist. But this most recent attempt to hire a hitman disturbed his conscience. He sent a photograph to the FBI of the intended victim. The FBI was able to hash out who it was trying to have the hit done, and things spiraled from there. What we know now is that the hit was requested by the wife of a man who had been cheating on her with a young college student. The wife was so jealous that she wanted the college student taken care of. But so far, no charges have actually been made because the trial has been pushed back thanks to COVID-19. The FBI hasn't even released the names of those involved, only the details about the case. Number 3. Not invited to the party. A jealous boyfriend killed 6 people in Colorado because he wasn't invited to a birthday party. This guy was so mad that nobody invited him to the party that he crashed it and opened fire on the guests. The shooter has been identified as Teodoro Macias. He was in a relationship for about a year with a woman named Sandra Ibarra. But when Sandra had a birthday party thrown by her family and nobody invited her boyfriend, apparently for good reason, he became wild and unpredictable. In fact, Teodoro was already considered to be an irrationally jealous partner and extremely controlling. He wasn't invited to the party because Sandra's family didn't want him around. But he came around anyway. The party was taking place in a mobile home park in Colorado Springs. By the time police arrived on the scene, after getting calls of an active shooter, 6 people were dead and 1 was injured. The victims included Sandra and 5 of her close family relatives. Number 2. The jealous beautician. In Moscow, a jealous beautician dropped her friend's baby from a high-rise apartment 130 feet to the ground. This truly evil act earned the woman 17 years in jail. Her name is Daria Shavalkina, and she was jealous of another woman named Yaroslava Korolyova. Daria was jealous not because her friend was sleeping with her husband or anything, but because her friend had a better life. Yaroslava had a loving husband. She had a happy life at home, and everything was going just great for her. But Daria's life kind of sucked. She was so jealous that she went to the other woman's house, picked up her 2-month-old daughter, and tossed her out the window. It didn't seem to be planned. There was no rhyme or reason to it. It just kind of happened. If Daria thought her life sucked before, now she has to live the rest of her life as a baby killer for the next 17 years while she's locked up. Chances are she's not going to be treated overly well by her fellow inmates. And number 1, poison makeup. Janet Overton was planning to go whale watching with her son on January 24, 1988. But before they ever made it out of the driveway, Janet collapsed in front of her house in Dana Point, California. Her son, Eric, and her husband, Richard Overton, called 911. They then followed the ambulance to the hospital, where Janet died. It seemed like a freak accident until the coroner's office conducted the autopsy. They couldn't figure out the cause of death. It was an enormous mystery, and the police were getting suspicious. Investigators talked to Janet's friends. One of them said she had been complaining about unexplainable sores on her face. Her health had been deteriorating. Her health actually started to fall after she had been involved in an extramarital affair with a married assistant superintendent named Bill Dawson. 6 months after Janet's death was when the police finally caught a break. Richard Overton's ex-wife, Dorothy, came forward to tell the police that in the 1970s, she too developed a sudden illness after she asked Richard for a divorce. She found out that her beauty products had been laced with selenium, something fatal in large doses. But because she didn't die, she never pushed the issue. In the end, investigators were able to prove that Richard had been poisoning his wife's beauty products because he was jealous after the affair she was having. Richard had gotten a hold of cyanide, selenium, and other toxins to gradually poison his wife until she finally dropped dead in their driveway. He was ultimately arrested in 1991 and charged with a murder in the first degree, sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. What's the craziest case of jealousy that you've ever experienced? Let us know in the comments, and thanks so much for watching. Remember to hit subscribe if you liked what you saw, and come back soon for more. See you next time.